The U.S. says it will not send an official delegation to Beijing for the 2022 Winter Olympics. That's over the regime's human rights abuses. The U.S. chooses a clear rhetoric towards China's aggression in the Indo-Pacific. It's said to help maintain the U.S.'s competitive upper hand over the communist regime. Another nation in Europe sends politicians to Taiwan. This follows last month's visit by members of the European Parliament. China is putting U.S. officials on high alert. That's as the country seeks to build its first ever naval military base on the Atlantic Ocean. And more than 13,000 counterfeit products seized after arriving from China. If the designer goods had been real, that'd be worth a combined total of over $30 million. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The Biden administration announced today that U.S. officials will not attend the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing, citing China's human rights atrocities. This comes after Beijing threatened to take countermeasures against any such diplomatic boycotts.
The White House made the announcement on a diplomatic boycott just 60 days before the 2022 Winter Olympics are set to begin in Beijing.
The Biden administration will not send any diplomatic or official representation to the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics and Paralympic Games, given the PRC's ongoing genocide and crimes against humanity in Xinjiang and other human rights abuses.
Psaki said that the administration will fully support the athletes on Team USA, but they will not be contributing to the fanfare of the Games.
U.S. diplomatic or official representation would treat these games as business as usual in the face of the PRC's egregious human rights abuses and atrocities in Xinjiang, and we simply can't do that.
Psaki emphasized that the U.S. has a fundamental commitment to promoting human rights. Earlier on Monday, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian threatened that Beijing will take resolute countermeasures if the U.S. insists on the boycott. He also implied that the move would affect cooperation between China and the U.S. in important areas.
Our view is that cooperation on transnational issues is not a favor to us. It is not a transaction.
The White House announcement doesn't come as a surprise, as President Biden said last month that he was considering a diplomatic boycott. Secretary of State Antony Blinken also said that the U.S. has been consulting with allies and partners on a shared approach to the Beijing Games out of concerns over China's human rights record. Last Friday, Lithuania confirmed a diplomatic boycott of the Games. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has said that he's considering a similar move. Incoming German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock is also floating the idea. Russian President Vladimir Putin is the only leader of a major country who has accepted China's invitation to attend the Winter Olympics. The pressure to boycott the Games is mounting, especially over China's treatment of tennis player Peng Shuai, a three-time Olympian. In November, Peng accused a former high-ranking Chinese official of pressuring her into sex. She was silenced on social media and disappeared from public view for 2 weeks, prompting concerns over her safety. Human rights groups welcomed the boycott but said Washington could do more to hold China accountable.
The U.S. is not making any essential changes to its policy in the Indo-Pacific region, but it chose a clear rhetoric towards China's aggressions and is trying to maintain its competitive edge over the communist regime. To do so, the Pentagon intends to work closer with private industry to develop high-tech systems and strengthen ties with allies. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said on Saturday that China's recent military activity in the Indo-Pacific, including near Taiwan, are disturbing. He gave the speech at the Reagan National Defense Forum in California.
We remain steadfast to our One China policy and our commitments under the Taiwan Relations Act to support Taiwan's ability to defend itself while also maintaining our capacity to resist any resort to force that would jeopardize the security of the people of Taiwan.
Austin's speech comes as the U.S. faces China's growing economic power, as well as growing power in space, cyber, and nuclear capabilities.
We're clear-eyed about the challenge that China presents. But China's not 10 feet tall. This is America. You know, we have the greatest industry, the greatest innovators in the world, and we're going to do what's necessary to create the capabilities that help us maintain the competitive edge going forward.
Austin says the U.S. doesn't want to be in a conflict, but it doesn't fear competition either.
No, we're not seeking an Asian version of NATO or trying to build an anti-China coalition. And we're not asking countries to choose between the United States and China. But America isn't a country that fears competition. And we're going to meet this one with confidence and resolve, and not panic and pessimism.
Austin adds that he thinks there's a lot of space for diplomacy and leadership to work. Taiwan is deepening its ties to Europe. That's as a delegation from Slovakia visits Taiwan. The trip marks Slovakia's highest level visit to the island since it opened a representative office there in 2003.
The fact that we are here today, despite the pandemic, is because we're determined and committed to work together with Taiwan.
The delegation's visit follows last month's mission by members of the European Parliament.
I'm really happy for those opportunities and support, and would like to say that Slovakia is ready to become an equal partner, and not only in good but also in hard times as the current pandemic situation is. Slovakia supports Taiwan.
Beijing claims self-ruled Taiwan as part of mainland China, but the island has never been ruled by China's Communist Party and enjoys its own democratically elected officials and constitution. Taiwan also maintains formal diplomatic ties with 15 countries. The EU Parliament passed a resolution centered on Taiwan issues in October, noting tensions in the South China Sea, while another EU member, Lithuania, opened a Taiwan representative office in its capital in November. It will function as a de facto embassy. What's more, the head of Taiwan's National Development Council visited Slovakia in October. The official says Taiwanese investment has created 3,000 jobs in the country. The two countries have also donated vaccine doses and face masks to each other during the pandemic, seen as expressions of friendship. China's growing threat may not be confined to the Indo-Pacific and now may be bleeding into the Atlantic. Beijing's aggression has put U.S. authorities on high alert. That's as China vies to build a permanent military base thousands of miles outside its borders in an African country on the Atlantic Ocean called Equatorial Guinea. But according to the Wall Street Journal, citing classified U.S. intelligence reports, the effort has alarmed U.S. officials. The suspected base is a large Navy port in the coastal city of Bara. It's situated across the Atlantic Ocean from the east coast of the U.S. and is capable of hosting submarines and aircraft carriers. The base's location and proximity could give the communist regime an upper hand against the U.S. military. The Pentagon and the White House are taking notice. Officials there have urged Equatorial Guinea to reject Beijing's plan. If granted permission, the overseas base would become China's second in Africa. In 2017, it opened one on the other side of the continent in Djibouti, a small nation and a key Red Sea ally to the U.S. in the Horn of Africa. But that's not all China is pushing for. It's also seeking out other base-building opportunities around Africa. The chief of U.S. Africa Command told the Associated Press that the Chinese naval base there concerns him greatly. U.S. Customs and Border Protection is telling holiday shoppers to be on alert. More than 13,000 counterfeit designer products were seized in a cargo shipment from China. Customs officers at the Los Angeles Long Beach Seaport intercepted shipments of fake designer bags enclosing with fake logos of Gucci, Chanel, Fendi, YSL, and Louis Vuitton. The agency says if the seized merchandise was genuine, it would have a combined value of almost $30.5 million. The agency also says counterfeit products are now being posted as seemingly legitimate listings on well-known websites, especially when shoppers are looking for deals during the holiday season. The port director says the goods are often of poor quality and can be unsafe. Customs and Border Protection says China is still the primary source of the fake goods. In 2020, China was the source of half of all fake seized goods. Thousands of people protested in Serbia's capital on Saturday against the government's new laws. Environmentalists say the laws will let foreign companies, including one from China, exploit local resources. Dhruv Tikikar reports.
Traffic came to a grinding halt on a highway in the Serbian capital of Belgrade on Saturday as thousands of people blocked the route to protest two new laws on land use. It's feared the legislation will help foreign companies exploit local resources. The Serbian government offered mineral resources to companies like China's Sijin copper miner and Rio Tinto. But environmentalists say the projects will pollute land and water in the Balkan nation.
After this protest today, everyone should know, whoever's in power in this country, that people must not have their land or water taken away and have their air poisoned.
While Rio has vowed to adhere to all domestic and EU environmental standards, activists say its planned $2.4 billion lithium mine would irreversibly pollute drinking water in the area. Protesters have already set up similar roadblocks across the country in a second round of nationwide demonstrations on the issue.
Industrial pollution from a Chinese-owned steel mill coats a town in Serbia in dust. Cancer rates there have quadrupled in under a decade. There are around 100,000 people living in the town. According to the local public health body, cancer cases jumped to over 6,800 in 2019. Back in 2011, it was a little over 1,700. 5 years ago, China's biggest steelmaker bought the plant from the Serbian state for $53 million. The company denies the connection between soaring cancer rates and the plant's pollution. But activists say the steel mill is an example of Chinese-owned industrial firms ignoring pollution standards.
I think it is beyond comprehension that in 2021 we have to discuss the dust which is falling on our heads. Black dust, red dust, which is greasy, which sticks to lungs, which makes breathing difficult. That we have to speak about slag, which is deposited wherever they find it convenient. To speak about air, which can be smelled and tasted. About people who have to dry their laundry in glass houses, who have to wash their crops before using them.
Serbia is a long-standing candidate for EU admission. The country has forged close ties with Beijing, and China has invested billions of euros into Serbia's infrastructure over recent years. China's central bank has reduced the reserve requirement ratio for the second time this year. Why is it doing this, and what impacts will this have on the United States? Here are the details.
China's central bank is reducing reserve requirements. It will lower the ratio by 0.5 percentage point on December 15th, releasing the equivalent of $188 billion. This is the second time this year it's changed the requirements. The bank says the cut is a regular operation of monetary policy and that it was done to better support the real economy.
Cutting the reserve requirement means banks don't have to keep as much money on hand than they used to. So say, for example, a bank had $100,000 on hand and the reserve requirement was 10%, they would only have to keep $10,000 on hand. The other $90,000 they can go ahead and put back into the economy by lending it out to people.
Nicholas Creel is an assistant professor of business law at Georgia College and State University. Creel says China's move is a sign of desperation.
It's pretty clear at this point that China's economy is much weaker than the government's formally letting on. I think it's always been in the back of our minds that their COVID-0 policy, shutting down entire factories and provinces to go ahead and get us to mitigate as many cases as we possibly can down to zero, is making their manufacturing sector shut down for sometimes weeks at a time. That's taking a big economic toll.
Milton Ezrati is the author of Bite-Size Investing. Ezrati says they may not be that desperate.
If the Federal Reserve had done it in the United States, I think it would be a sign of some kind of desperation. But the People's Bank of China uses this particular tool, so I think I'm agreeing with the government in Beijing that this is probably misinterpreted.
Ezrati thinks China is eager to cover the damage from the Evergrande scandal as well as damage from other debt-burdened firms that aren't publicly known yet. And this decision carries big risks.
It encourages borrowing, and China already has a great deal of debt. By giving the banks more facilities to lend, you have more borrowing. That's one risk. The other is ultimately down the road, by freeing up more liquidity, by effectively putting more money into the economy, you run the risk of inflation. And China's a command economy, but it still runs that risk.
As Roddy says, China's decision helps the United States. The more active China's economy is, the more buying there is in the U.S. Chenny Wu, NTD News.
China's debt-trapped real estate company Evergrande saw its shares plunge to an 11-year low today. That's after it said there was no guarantees that it could repay its mammoth debt. The company's debt currently stands at altogether more than $300 billion.
That statement also prompted Chinese authorities to summon its chairman. Shares dropped 12% to just under $2 Hong Kong during trading hours. If Evergrande were to fold, it's feared the collapse would send shockwaves through the country's property sector and beyond. Monday also marked the end of a 30-day grace period on a payment it owed of tens of millions of dollars. Authorities in Guangdong province, where Evergrande is headquartered, have summoned Chairman Hui Ka-yan. Officials later said a working group would be sent to the developer at Evergrande's request to oversee risk management, strengthen internal controls, and maintain normal operations. Beijing's central bank has tried to reassure the market, saying that housing sales, land purchases, and financing have already returned to normal in China.
Evergrande's ability to sell projects is going down to almost nothing, almost zero sales for November. This also makes debt payments difficult. Another Chinese developer is also trapped in debt. Sunshine 100 said on Monday it had defaulted on a $170 million bond due Sunday. They say it was over liquidity issues arising from bad economic environment. Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba shares experienced ups and downs today. It was down 5.6% in the Hong Kong stock market and jumped 7.3% in the U.S. market. That's after the company said it would recognize its international and domestic businesses amid many uncertainties.
The company will also replace its chief financial officer. It all comes after a tough year when Alibaba faced mounting competition, slowing demand, and a crackdown by regulators. Now the firm says it will form two new units, an international digital commerce section and one for China digital commerce. The aim is to become more agile and accelerate growth. It's also in line with Alibaba's goal to make globalization a key focus. The company also announced that Deputy Chief Financial Officer Toby Zhu would take over from Maggie Wu as CFO in April. Alibaba cut its forecast for annual revenue growth last month to the slowest pace since its 2014 stock market debut. In November, sales at its annual online shopping festival Singles Day grew at their slowest rate ever. Chinese regulators have also cracked down on the tech sector and targeted alleged monopolistic behavior. Alibaba was investigated for antitrust issues and fined a record $2.8 billion in April for abusing its dominant market position.
Beijing's clampdown on various industries in China started last year. It has affected high-tech giants, e-commerce companies, the financial sector, the education sector, ride-hailing apps, and online gaming, among others. So far, China's regulators give no sign of when it will end and what the next step will be. Pandemic reports are getting worse in northeast China. Infection numbers are rising in Inner Mongolia, while neighboring province Heilongjiang saw many districts inside its capital city reclassified this weekend. Officials now say they pose medium risk for getting sick. Let's take a look.
Harbin City is under de facto lockdown orders. It's the capital city of China's Heilongjiang province, located in the country's northeast corner. City officials reported 7 new cases there as of Sunday, though NTD can't independently verify that number due to Beijing's strict grip on information flow out of China. A number of Harbin residents woke up Sunday to find their health codes had changed from green to yellow. The digital codes are part of China's contact tracing system and can be accessed via a user's smartphone. Yellow is one of 3 possible readings for China's health codes. Green means the user is healthy. Yellow means they have come into contact with a suspected virus case and must quarantine for 7 days, while red reflects mandatory quarantine for 14 days. Those with yellow or red codes may lose their access to certain public spaces and transportation. Local officials reportedly marked the codes yellow for those who had spent more than 10 minutes in the same area as an infected patient within the last 14 days. But the range of what's considered the same area is causing concerns. Even being a number of blocks away from an infected patient seemingly counts, and so does a user's cell phone signal drifting nearby, regardless of whether or not the person physically passed by the patient. Some have taken to social media to voice complaints. One wrote, "It's a mess. We didn't get any explanation before getting the yellow or red codes." On top of health code concerns, local officials issued a notice on Saturday mandating that residents stay within city limits and that non-residents avoid non-essential entry into the area. Authorities also required all restaurants in the city to suspend indoor dining.
It's definitely a big deal. Even if people were allowed to eat in, not many people would come. The impact is immense. We can't make any money.
Harbin has already gone through 4 rounds of lockdown this year due to the pandemic. The shutdowns have put considerable strain on small business owners.
The stores here are all renting buildings with a yearly rent of 200,000 yuan. What should we do? We have no place to go to defend our rights. The stores were still open yesterday, but the notice was published this morning and all stores had to be closed.
The city's notice didn't specify a reopening date.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.